headphones and close your eyes. It's midnight, and you're listening to the Ghost Story Guys. Welcome to the Ghost Story Guys. I'm Brennan Storr.
I'm Paul Bestall.
And this is a show where we talk about spooks, specters, and all the other things watching us from the shadows beyond the campfire. Some conversations only make sense after the sun has set, and this is most definitely one. Thanks for tuning in. This is episode number 105, and we're coming to you from that tiny mountain cabin you dream about but can never quite reach. How are you, Paul?
I'm very well. How are you doing, sir?
I am good. I'm excited to tell the haunted stories of Yorkshire. But before we get there, we have a guest, our very first guest in Ghost Story Guys 2.0. He is a returning guest, of course. You know him as the host of We Need to Talk About Ghosts. He is also an accomplished singer-songwriter whose latest album, Songs I Don't Appreciate, was released in November last year. He is Kevin Eustace. Kevin, welcome back to the Ghost Story Guys.
Hello, Brennan, and hello, Paul. How are you doing, gents?
Very well. How are you, sir?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad. Thank you very much. And can I just say, I think you two are doing great together on this 2.0. I think you are doing really well. So congrats on behalf of me and everyone else who's listening, I would say.
Well, thanks, man. Thank you very much. So, Kev, you have joined us to tell stories from haunted Yorkshire. But before we do that, just how are things going over on your show? How are you guys managing this nightmare in which we daily find ourselves?
Like most podcasts, we've had a bit of a wobble. We've seen numbers go up. We've seen numbers go down. But the community there is really good. And there's a lot of interaction going on. We've just started taking calls now as well to try and expand the show. So the show basically went from being around 30 to 40 minutes each episode. I think the longest we've got in the last few weeks has been about 2.5 hours, which was a bit of a shocker for me when I put it all together. Yeah, but it's a good laugh.
Oh, that's great. I do like it. It brings a new element to the show. And yeah, folks, if you're not listening to We Need to Talk About Ghosts, which I assume you are, but if you're not, you should be, because it is a ton of fun.
Yeah, it's a lovely show.
Oh, thanks, guys.
You can send us the check afterwards.
I will, yeah. I've got one in my wallet here. Don't worry.
Let's all hug.
I noticed that Brennan's got a Zoom camera on. Paul, you might be in your fancy dress today because you're hiding your Zoom camera.
That's why he's hiding it.
Yeah. No, I just, because of the problems we had with the bandwidth the last time we were together, Kev, I don't want to tempt fate. Yeah,
we tend to share one bandwidth in the UK, don't we? And it's split between me and you. Whoever's been the nicest gets it.
Yeah, have to put 10 bob in the meter, as my grandma would say.
Yeah.
Everyone else is trying to watch Coronation Street reruns on iPlayer, and they are really pissed right now.
Yeah, definitely.
So Kev, yes, he has joined us to tell stories from haunted Yorkshire. And I'll be totally honest, gents, I thought Yorkshire and Liverpool were much closer together than they are. I don't know the geography of Northern England very well, and I thought, these two things will dovetail nicely. But no, apparently they're a little further away than I thought.
It's a strange thing, really, because I think over where you are in Canada there, we'd probably be classed as the same area, in truth. It's the weird thing about the UK. It's like probably from where I am in Liverpool to Leeds, it's about a 2-hour drive, which isn't that far in the grand scheme of things. I'd probably still stay overnight on the way because it's still such a mission to us in the UK. That's
the thing. I mean, I learned from my wife that 2 hours in the UK that's a voyage. Whereas we used to drive 2 hours to the next town to get lunch.
Exactly.
All right. So before we get to the stories, I have an announcement, which makes it sound much more important than it is. I have, through a series of circumstances, ended up working on a second book. I was contacted by Barbara Smith, who's a friend of mine and a friend of the show, and listeners will remember her from one of our bonus shows. I want to say it was bonus 6. Barbara has retired from writing ghost books. She's still working on some fiction stuff, but no longer writing in our genre. And she had a bunch of leads for stories about haunted fire halls and firefighters. And it was never something that would occur to me to write on my own, but she really wants to see this book written, and again, has some leads and some suggestions for other places to start. And I thought, you know what? Why not? It's been a long time since Strange came out. The joke about, buy that particular book is getting real old because I don't know that there's anyone listening who doesn't have a copy yet. So I thought, yep, now is the time. So if there's anyone out there, if you work in, if you work in emergency services, but specifically if you work as a firefighter, if you work in a fire hall and you have your own story of haunting, whether it be on the job or in the fire hall itself, I would love to hear it. Ghoststoryguys@gmail.com is a way to start. And then I will reach out to you and we'll talk about maybe setting up a phone interview, because I like to do my interviews as in person as possible. I like to ask questions and kind of flesh things out. So yeah, if you are a firefighter or you know a firefighter who has a ghost story or any kind of unusual story, doesn't have to be specific to ghosts, shoot me a message. I'm also collecting stories from LA County, obviously down in the US. So if you live in the Los Angeles area and you have a story you want to share with me, ghoststoryguys@gmail.com. That's for a longer range project. But again, if you have stories you feel like sharing, please do get in touch. All right, gentlemen, shall we take a break and then come back with Haunted Yorkshire?
Let's.
Welcome back. As I said before the break, on this episode we're going to be talking about tales of haunting from Yorkshire. And of course, Paul, you are born and raised Yorkshire, correct?
Indeed I am, yes.
So the tales of haunting from there must be second nature to you at this point.
Obviously, as somebody that grew up in a haunted former vicarage across
Right.
the road from a graveyard, it's always been something that's been very close to me throughout my entire life.
Whether you want it to be or not.
Precisely, yes. I didn't really have much choice.
So what are some popular Yorkshire haunts? What are some popular tales that, or even less popular stories that maybe folks from outside Yorkshire don't know?
Well, there's a few that I've always really liked. Going back to the 1990s, there was a couple of really good books written by a lady called Liz Lanahan, who collected a lot of stories from miners, guys working down in the coal pits, because Yorkshire was a vast employer of men in the coal mines that sort of powered Britain in the majority of the 20th century. And she wrote this wonderful collection of first-hand accounts from people who had ghostly experiences underground, which is a whole new level of fear.
Being underground is awful anyways. Throw that on top of it, it sounds like hell.
Yeah, so I've got one here, if you want me to paraphrase it for you.
Yeah, go for it.
Which was from a colliery called Silverwood Colliery in Yorkshire. And this particular story ended up hitting the national headlines. It was so well reported and the effect it had on the person that experienced it. So this particular guy was down underground with a couple of colleagues who were slightly ahead of him in the shaft as they were working. And as he was looking towards them, he kind of noticed a light come in between them, as though somebody had walked sideways across his path. And he was really perplexed because he wasn't sure where he was, but he didn't think there was an entrance there.
Right.
So this light just sort of appeared, because obviously they'd all wear their miners' hats. And as he got closer, he realised that this guy had just come from straight out the wall in front of him. And as he realised, he got so close to him, he could look at this guy's outline and his silhouette. The guy sort of turned and he had no features on his face. It was his head and his shoulders and his chest. It was just a black space underneath this hat and a light.
Unacceptable. So
he just broke down, started screaming, ran off towards the lift, scarpered to the surface, and he was so traumatized he basically had to be signed off work for a month with shock, and refused to ever go back underground, and said if they couldn't offer him a job working above ground, he would pack in. And essentially they sorted something out for him, and he lost about a third of his weekly wage, because you used to get paid danger money, obviously, for being underground in the mines. So he took a massive pay cut simply to never go underground again.
Wow.
Did I hear that right? Sorry, that you described it as like you could see the lamp on the miner's hat and or helmet, and it is up at torso and no face.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And he came out of the wall of like the tunnel that they'd built to go and do the mining. So was I take it from looking at that, was there anything you'd assume, with us all being into the paranormal, that he's walked out of a former entrance or something that's caved in at one point or another? Yeah,
they think so. They think that's the only way. But it just absolutely traumatized him, because the other guys said he just screamed and ran off.
Imagine being the two guys left underground. What just happened, Earl? Well, I don't know. Either he's lost his mind or we're about to die.
Yeah. Even worse if there was a third one there and he's known for having no particular outstanding features. And they're like, sorry, Terry. Every time, Terry, they just run from you.
I mean, the other thing as well is that, and I'm sure Kev can vouch for this, miners were always regarded as tough, no-nonsense guys because it was a bloody dangerous job.
Yeah, I'm from a town called Huyton, which is just outside of Liverpool. It's still within the area of Liverpool. But then as close as Liverpool city centre is to where I grew up was a place called St. Helens, and that's a mining community also. And when I was a kid, my dad used to, when I'd be watching television and say, for example, if we had people round and there was nowhere to sit, he would say, why don't you do a miner squat? And I didn't know what a miner squat was. And he used to try and teach me how to do it, which you can still not do to this day. But apparently it's you kind of sit on your heels. And he said that that's how the miners would sit on their lunch breaks, but they'd do it for like up to an hour at a time. They'd got this particular way of sitting where they could just lodge into it. And they'd just be as solid as a rock. You couldn't push them over. Almost like some sort of yogi in the Far East, except this is St. Helens eating a pie.
Yeah. No, it's a very, very tough and no nonsense, and their ability to be able to eat food despite it covered in coal dust as well is always outstanding. And it's always the fact that you used to have to wash their eyes as well, which always used to make my eyes water thinking about the fact they had to put soap in their eyes to get the coal, because basically you would look like they've got eyeliner if they didn't.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because the coal dust would just get inside your eyelid.
Oh my God. That reminds me of this guy I met in New Mexico years ago. I was in a bar sitting there drinking. It was in Raton, New Mexico. And I met this guy named Joe, and Joe had been a uranium miner before they knew how dangerous uranium was.
Wow. And
the scar tissue in his lungs was so bad that it had compressed his heart to the point where he'd had 2 heart attacks. And when I met him, he was sitting in the bar having some drinks. Because why not after 2 heart attacks? Enjoy yourself, right? And he said, I kind of live my life near to the clinic. They're kind of doing a little bit of rehabilitation on me. Not too much because we can't afford too much, but they're helping me, keep going. And I said, that's awful. And he just said, well, that's just the way it is. I'd do it again. I did it for my country. And I just thought, man, This is a different mentality than mine. A tougher people, a different kind of people.
Yeah. Well, I was the first generation of my family that didn't work down the pit.
Oh, wow.
So where I grew up, we had 10 within, I don't know, about 10 miles of us. They were just everywhere. Shit. You could just see the pit heads.
It makes me wonder if that's part of the reason why there seems to be so much more paranormal lore up north. You guys just spent so long punching the earth in the guts. You pissed off so many things that now they're coming upstairs and they're coming for you.
Yeah. It's where all the black shucks came from.
What? Speaking of other frightening things, what are some other tales from around Yorkshire, Paul?
Well, probably the most famous case to come out of Yorkshire is the Black Monk of Pontefract, which is one of those cases that occasionally gets some publicity every sort of 5 or 6 years, and it just does the rounds again. And it's one of Britain's more unusual poltergeist cases because it's one of those that has a really slow build-up, explodes, and then happens really quickly. I think it only lasted about 9 months. And these days, you can actually go and stop in the house. The house is only available for people who want to go ghost hunting.
Really?
So it's 30 East Drive.
It's a bit of a money spinner as well, I believe, because it's not cheap to stay over, and it's exceptionally hard to book in there as well.
That's fascinating.
Only £400 for the night.
Holy man. I mean, is that per person or just generally?
That's a maximum of a group of 4.
Oof.
Interestingly, the guy who owns it, Bill, is he bought it. Did he buy it directly from the Pritchards? Do you know, Paul?
I think so, because it's one of those which I always find amazing about this kind of stoic attitude in the face of paranormal terror. Yeah. Is that these people go, I'm not moving out my council house. I've paid for this. Yeah. You're not moving me, you spooky bugger.
Because Bill was the director of the film When the Lights Went Out, wasn't he? Which is the kind of the movie centerpiece of the Black Monk of Pontefract haunting. And I think they'd done the filming in the house, or a majority of the filming took place in the house.
Yeah, they did, because somebody else involved in the film, I think it was his mum, who was one of the friends of the Pritchards, and she'd actually witnessed stuff flying about, because obviously it had everything you could expect in a really exciting poltergeist case, including annoying the neighbours by banging on the walls all night.
I mean, sometimes I just do that for fun. That's got nothing to do with poltergeist. I just hate my neighbors.
I think the key aspect of this is that, you have everything such as ports, pools of water, like a weird mist would form halfway up the room. So the bottom half would be completely clear and the top would have this kind of hazy whiteness drifting around everywhere. And obviously the daughter, Diane, was famously dragged up the stairs backwards in front of her parents.
Jesus.
That particular case is one where I read one of the most interesting descriptions of what someone believes or theories behind poltergeist activity. And it was Colin Wilson. It's like a writer on the occult from the UK. He's dead now, I believe. But he said he was talking to Guy Lyon Playfair about the Black Monk of Pontefract case. Colin was on his way up to do an article on it, I believe. And he asked his opinion on what was going on. And apparently Guy Lyon Playfair gave this excellent description, which I've never heard before. And I only read it last year at some point. But he said that he thinks that what poltergeists are, he said in a haunting, he said, why you find little pools of water in places, they will be like balls of energy, like footballs of energy in a house that's got bad emotion. Or as we all know, a child goes through puberty, there's high energy, high emotion. He said, in these houses where there's high energy and emotion, balls of energy will appear in that house. He said, and they of themselves are harmless. He said, but a mischievous spirit will see those balls of energy. And just like a child seeing a football, will run over and kick it around the house. He said, so Guy Lyon Playfair believed that poltergeist activity wasn't necessarily a spirit, say, grabbing a clock from the mantelpiece and waving it around. He believed it was a spirit kicking a football in the living room, and it's just knocking off items as it goes around, which is an interesting shout. And he said when these balls collapse, that's what leaves the little pool of water.
On the subject of poltergeists, as we start to go through the stories in a little bit, our listeners will notice, and certainly I noticed when going through the larger selection of stories that Luke found, there seems to be a real concentration of poltergeist stories coming from Yorkshire. And I wonder if that has something to do with the landscape or the people, or if it's just coincidence. But I think the fact that there is such a famous poltergeist case there, and again, as we'll see, quite a number of other poltergeist and poltergeist adjacent stories, it does make me wonder. What do you guys think?
It's an interesting shout. I mean, you touched on it earlier, Brennan, when you were saying about the North being viewed, shall we say, a little bit more rougher than the South. And it's arguably the case in terms of like upbringing and way of life. I don't think it's just necessarily down to climate. It's obviously down to finances and other things, and arguably a lot of politics that we won't go into. But the North does have this opinion, or this attitude, if you like, of you suck your gut up and you get on with it no matter what happens in life. And because of that, I do think, and I know, in fact, from personal experience, I know a lot of friends and family who have lived in very repressed houses. There's a lot of anger, There's a lot of emotion going on there that doesn't come to the surface. So if we're going off the balance of that being atypical of the North, then I think arguably it could be a hotbed for the likes of these alleged emotion-driven acts of poltergeist activity.
Interesting. That is a fascinating thought. The repression thing had never occurred to me.
Not renowned for being overly serious, I'll be honest, but that was a rare moment of succinct seriousness there.
So what do you got lined up next for us there, Bestall?
Okay, well, after the spooky Black Monk of Pontefract, I have one of my favourite ghost stories, and probably my favourite Yorkshire ghost story, which involves a gentleman called Harry Martindale, who in 1953 was an 18-year-old apprentice heating engineer, and he had been asked to go and fix the boiler in the Treasurer's House in York, which is a beautiful building in the city centre. It's fabulous. And he was pottering away in the cellar up a ladder when he heard a noise, and he turned around, and to his astonishment, a Roman centurion decided to walk out of the wall in front of him, followed by a horse and cart, and then another 20 centurions. Now, poor Harry was so shocked he fell off his ladder and lay on the floor just staring open-mouthed at this procession as it walked past him, to the point, once again, that he had to take 2 weeks off work with shock and was admitted to hospital because he was a shaking wreck. But one of the striking aspects of his experience was that the soldiers were only visible from the knee up.
Interesting.
So when they began to investigate the case, it turned out that the treasurer's house was actually built on an old Roman garrison, and where Harry had been doing his boiler work was the original road that would lead into the garrison.
So the road would have been a foot or two below the floor he was working on, hence it being seen from the knees up.
It's moments like that and situations like that that take me back to something I know we've talked about many times on the show, but this notion that certain things we classify as haunting may just be breakdowns in the way time works. You know, like you may be seeing a moment from the past rather than a repeat, rather than ghosts, you know, like because the thought of, these dead Romans just spending the afterlife walking back and forth up this goddamn road is deeply depressing.
I think you're right. I think that's a really good analogy of it.
Yeah. But it also, I mean, it's one of those things that you can classify hauntings into specific types. And as we've touched on, we've already mentioned poltergeist. Right. And obviously this particular experience it has nothing in common with poltergeist, but they both come under the umbrella of paranormal. And as you touch on there, is this what you would consider a stone tape aspect of it? Because there are certain hauntings around the UK and the world where a specific event will be repeated to certain people on certain days for no reason at all. And you can go back the year after and it won't happen. So I've often been perplexed by these particular ones where you have such a specific repeating of a moment in time that seems to serve no purpose. It's not a particularly frightening experience. It's not an earth-shattering historical moment. It's just 20 guys doing their job.
I did see a really interesting one in 14 Times a while back talking about the stone tape effect. And it was kind of like the life cycle of a ghost, which was fascinating. And there was a castle somewhere in Scotland. And basically the way the story went in the article, it was along the lines of, in the 1800s, people reported seeing a woman in red on the turrets. Yeah. In the late 1800s, people reported seeing a woman in pink. By 1910s, people said they could see an outline of a woman. By 1950s, there was just the scent of perfume going past. So it was like that recording had wore out over time.
Yeah, fading away.
Yeah, that, or I wonder again if we, not that I think this is the only answer, but if we're talking about, say, a mistake in the way time displays itself, maybe that rift can heal itself. You know, maybe it functions sort of in the same way any organic body does. It kind of has to heal. I saw this movie a little while ago called Synchronic, and it's really great. It's great sci-fi, but it basically is about this designer drug that is created and then disappears very quickly. And what it seems to do is it seems to displace people in time for a certain amount of time, and where they displace to is dependent on where they're standing when the drug hits. So of course it's fiction, but it reminded me of when I had my hypnotic regression years ago. The way the spirit sort of characterized reality, everything is a bunch of different pieces kind of turning inside each other, almost like gears. If you imagine like bike chains, like sort of time being like a series of bike chains, next to each other, crossing each other. And again, I sometimes wonder, maybe they slip the spokes. And when these things happen, maybe sometimes they're just meant to be that way, and maybe sometimes it's a mistake. Who knows why it would happen? But I guess rivers dam up, and there are rock slides and things like this. And I don't know. Again, I don't necessarily think that is the case, but I wonder if that's possible as well. That if what we think of as stone tape is really just this other thing, sort of time repairing itself, because that's how it sort of runs its course, as you say.
Interesting. It's really good theory. That really good theory.
I can do theories all day. Work, not so much. Theories are easy. And there's another place in Yorkshire you were going to tell us about, the Golden Fleece.
Yeah, well, this is what me and Kev are very well acquainted with for different reasons. Yeah,
I've actually stayed at the Golden Fleece. It's but I'll let Paul do the description of what we're talking about first, and then I'll tell you my little anecdote after.
What is the Golden Fleece?
So York is famous for many things, apart from ghosts of centurions and Vikings and all kinds of other things running amok around the city at night, for its vast number of public houses. It has 365 pubs.
Holy shit.
One per day?
Yeah. Trying
Seems
to
like
get
a fair
around
project.
Yes. Not all are equal, I shall say that in my experience. But there are some wonderful little pubs. There's one pub that's basically like somebody's house, and it's the bar's brilliant. It literally like standing in an old sitting room. It's standing room only. About 12 people can get in it. You buy a pork pie. And if your beer's fizzy, the beer's gone off. It's that kind of pub. So nice though. And but the Golden Fleece is probably York's most famous haunted locale, with a couple of resident spirits. One is supposed to be the former wife of a mayor of York called Lady Alice, who flits around the building in a long flowing gown, weeping on occasion or just making noises and bothering people, tapping on doors. And then there's another one that's supposed to be some kind of outlaw with one eye, who's a bit of a character. But it's a very strange pub because it's clearly embraced its paranormal reputation, because it's been investigated on Most Haunted, notably, for better or worse. And
just to jump in for our listeners who don't know, Most Haunted was a UK ghost hunting show. It might even have been part of the first wave of ghost hunting shows.
It's just very quirky. It's wood panelled as well inside, and it's very old fashioned still. And when you walk in, to get from the front bar to the back bar, you've got to walk down a corridor, and then you can kind of go up some stairs to the accommodation where you can actually stay in the pub. But there's these really weird paper mache death masks on the wall of this corridor, which are very peculiar because they look like they're melting, but they're made of plaster and they're a bit off-putting. And then you'll go back into this sort of back bar dining room area where you will meet the resident regular, who is a skeleton sat at the bar with a pint glass in his hand, and he's been sat on a bar stool for about 15 years, I believe.
So interestingly, Becca, as a surprise for me, took me to the Golden Fleece to stay for my birthday a couple of years back. So I've had the pleasure of staying in the pub itself. And like Paul says, it's, you go down this little schneidy corridor and then you go up the stairs to the accommodation. And we were staying in a room. I can't remember the name of the room, but it was a big room that faced out to the front. And when you would go through the door, it was quite a low door because it's very, very old and very creaky and spooky right off the bat. There was like a little entrance room, like a lobby within the hotel room itself. And then you walk down again a little shady corridor to the main bedroom, but there's no door on that bedroom. So when you're lying in bed at night, you literally have one option. Two options. You either face your partner or you turn around and you face this long corridor, which is pitch black. Ooh. That leads to this little off room. So it's a perfect sort of room that you can imagine someone just hiding in and popping the head round the wall because there's no doors within the room. We were too drunk to experience any ghosts there at all, but we did go on a ghost tour, like a walking ghost tour. And the Golden Fleece was one of the stops. And we stood outside with all of these American tourists. And the guy points up to our room where we're staying. And he goes, this is the pilot's room. He said, there's meant to be the ghost of a Canadian pilot in here. He said, and occasionally when we've done the tour, you can see someone peeking out from the blinds. And I'm saying to Becca, I'm sure that's our room. I'm sure that's our room. And the light was on. And I said to Becca, did you turn it off before you went out? And she was like, no. And this guy was like, I don't think anyone's staying in there right now. And the light's on. And I was like, should we just say, no, that was us? And he went, no, just leave it.
There was a story among the first batch that I was sort of sifting for the show about the Golden Fleece. And I had written it. I'd included it in the script. And then I pulled it because it was just stupid. But I thought I'll share it briefly with you guys here just because I think it allows us to roast a certain kind of ghost hunter. And I think that's always a good thing. So this group obviously was part of a tour there, or they called it in their story an investigation. But right. You can hear hopefully you can hear the air quotes in my voice.
Yeah.
And basically they were in a room. Supposedly there's a male ghost who's quite aggressive, or who's said to be aggressive. And they were trying to get a sign from this aggressive male spirit. They were trying to, get it to do something. Because these people think ghosts are like trained seals. They're just waiting to balance a spectral ball on its friggin' nose. Yeah. And all of a sudden out of nowhere, well, they said all of a sudden, but I thought, well, you're asking for a fucking sign. Like something's going to happen, right? You're expecting something to happen. Well, a coat hanger falls out of the wardrobe, lands on the ground, and they all jump a mile. And they turn and look, and the other coat hangers are all kind of waving and jingling. And the way they characterize this, you'd think Satan himself had just popped out of the toilet and blasted a trumpet clear in their face, because they said some of us screamed and ran. And I thought, well, you're a hale and hearty bunch, aren't you?
Those are being from the south.
Yeah, exactly. I was just thinking that. These were not Northerners. The Northerner would have arm wrestled Satan and won.
Jumped in the wardrobe. Come on!
That's right.
Yeah, devil wears Prada, and I'll shove that coat hanger where the sun doesn't shine.
So, yeah. Anyways, I saw that and I thought, we're not putting this in the show. Like again, we'll talk about it here to kind of poke fun at it. Because again, I don't have a problem with people wanting to do ghost investigations. It's not something I do. I mean, not to say I wouldn't go if I was invited. You know, once being coughed on by someone else isn't a possible death sentence. But it's not something I'm ever going to organize.
My favourite's with EVP stuff, when you're just clearly getting static, and as you're watching this YouTube video or whatever, it comes up like Sarah written on the screen, and you're like, what? Didn't say Sarah at all.
Yeah.
And even they can't hear it at the time. That's the funny thing. They're like, we're not getting any answers. But in the background, 5 minutes before, it said Sarah, Anthony, death. And they're like, none of this has happened.
Just sounds like someone left the television on like a channel that had gone off the air. But they're out.
Exactly,
yeah. I think I've told this story before on the show, but I did a ghost tour in Chicago. And the idea is that you actually get sorted into groups, and then you go off and you try and make contact.
Yeah.
They have, what is it? Pendulums. They give you pendulums. And you have to try and make contact using these, rods, not pendulums, rods. And one of the guides was telling us, so if you contact a spirit, ask it to spell its name. He said, you know, there was a lot of, like Iroquois or some First Nations group that lived in the area, you know, a very long time ago. And he said, we tend to get spirits from there. And I said, just question, what alphabet? Like, do they spell their name using the English alphabet? Is it the same? How does that work? How do they transliterate that? Like, and I tell you, I've never seen someone shut down a line of questioning so goddamn fast.
Yeah.
So, you know, where is the upside down J on these rods? Like, how do I...
Where's my umlaut?
Yeah, I was cordially invited to shut the fuck up.
It makes me think, you know, there was a really, you know, like when everything's meant to be really serious, but something happens and just makes you laugh and you can't hold it in.
Oh, yeah.
Me and Becca went on a ghost hunt for my birthday, and another one in Liverpool this time. And we're in this room, there's about 6 of us and the tour guide. And she's allegedly psychic and all this carry on. And I'm you know, enjoying it for what it is. And at some point, the tour guide goes, okay, what I'm going to try now is I'm going to try and get a call and response. She says, so I'm just going to knock on this table. So she goes, right, and it's deathly quiet. Nothing happens. I'm just going to try again. Right, nothing happens. And this girl who's part of the group, who's really into all this, is one of the most broadest Scouse girls I've ever heard. And she puts her hand up and she goes, yes, love. And she goes, can I have a go at doing that knocking? So she says, because I think I've got a spirit with me. So the woman goes, of course you can, my love. Come over here and stand by the table. She goes, in your own time. She goes, in your own time, when you're ready. She goes, all right. I mean, bloody hell, the window cleaner coming round. No spirit's going to reply to that, are they? Or copy that knock. It was so funny. Because everyone was just expecting, like, and she started doing this, da, 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 da. We were like, oh my Lord, that's amazing.
She's doing Zeppelin's Moby Dick on that fucking thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
She's trying to get hold of John Bonham.
Yeah. I think I literally like laughed out loud and I was like, really sorry, that's dead funny. It's dead funny.
Yeah. I've seen a couple of people on TV trying to channel spirits of the past, and I've often thought that as well. I remember seeing one guy who claimed he was talking to somebody who'd been killed in the 12th century, and I was thinking, so can you understand Latin or French then? Because I'm not really sure they would speak in a language you would understand 900 years later, pal.
All dead people get a babblefish. That's just how it goes. These are the rules. I don't make them, Paul.
That's what Douglas Adams did on The Other Side. He gave everybody a babelfish.
Yep. Bless him. All right, so now it's time for the stories.
So this story is called Run. To be brutally honest, the reason I first started doing paranormal investigations was to impress Emily, a girl I was in love with. It's not that I don't believe in the paranormal, but I'm an enormous coward, and hanging about in the dark waiting for Satan's footman to gently tap me on the forehead has never occurred to me as a way to spend my weekend. However, Emily takes such things very seriously, and so, by extension, so do I. The first place my would-be paramour took me to was Fort Paul, a Napoleonic fort on the banks of the Humber, just downstream from Hull in Yorkshire. In addition to not exactly being thrilled about traipsing around a hillside that's been home to 500 years of military movements, I was also ambivalent about returning to Yorkshire, my last visit there having ended in a bar fight and a fond farewell to one of my favourite teeth. Emily, however, assured me that we would stay well away from the nightlife. Well, the living kind. It was a Friday, and we just joined up with a group that does these things en masse. A bunch of you pay a fee, and then you go to tempt fate with your digital recorder. To get from Leicester to Fort Paul was around a 2-hour drive, and by the time we arrived, the rest of the group was already there. The huge brick walls of the fort were imposing enough without my social anxiety, and then it kicked in anyways as acronyms were thrown around. EMF, EVP, and I nodded my head dutifully, as though I knew a damn thing about what was going on. The tour started in the vaults, and, to my great relief, absolutely nothing happened. This set up what we call in the business a false sense of security, and so I started to relax into the experience. The absolute hubris of this was shown to me at lightning speed when we proceeded into the Henry VIII tunnel, and we ended up a little ahead of the group. Inside the tunnel, there's a semicircle balcony, so Emily and I went upstairs and the group began trying to, well, I don't know what they were trying to do, but they succeeded in pissing something off. Considering they were wolf whistling into the dark, I can only assume provoking an enraged reaction was the point of the exercise, but who knows? Once they started, the atmosphere in the tunnel changed and I felt something touch my left arm. Emily was out of reach, so it couldn't have been her. When the group started to make their way out of the tunnel, Emily and I were among the last to leave, and on our way out, a couple of us stragglers turned around to take one last photo. It was then one of the other girls gave a final wolf whistle, like she was a builder on a bloody lunch break, and whatever is in these tunnels lost its fool mind. Despite there being no one from the group left in there, we heard massive, thunderous footsteps racing up towards us from the dark. Yes, we all ran, and there was no dignity in it. And frankly, I do not care.
I have never loved anyone enough to follow them into tunnels underground where there are supposed to be dead people. My hat is off to this
Amen.
Sporting in Yorkshire.
Yeah, that I believe. I believe the bar fist fight is probably part of that.
Yeah, Fort Paul was a spooky place. Sadly, it was a museum for a while, but something weird happened there. I think about a year ago, because it was a really odd museum with things like a witch's trial exhibit, and then really crap waxworks and a rubber Tyrannosaurus Rex and stuff.
Oh God,
incongruous.
Yeah, because it was supposed to be a military museum, and then it had got all these weird exhibits in it.
Who doesn't remember the great T-Rex advance?
The Napoleonic Wars. It's our Cretaceous division.
That's right. And so it just closed down. Is that the idea?
Yeah, it just shut, and the auction. I mean, they ended up getting about 6 figures for everything. All these really weird exhibits. Like I say, you could buy a skeleton and some really strange-looking waxworks of the royal family, and tortured witches. If you wanted.
I want the T-Rex, frankly, but that's me.
Definitely.
They had a plane as well that somebody bought for 21 grand.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I'm sure a drug runner didn't buy that.
No. That would be... Actually, that's a really great idea. I mean, let me write that down.
I do like the idea of a Napoleonic War museum, though, having absolutely bugger all to do with the Napoleonic Wars. I might start a business like that and say, oh yeah, come, I might do the flat like that. It sounds like it's got more stuff in this flat.
You know, I was talking with a guy on Twitter recently, and he was saying, like, what's something that you could tell people on a cruise ship that they have no way of verifying? You could just tell them, you know, I'm a Canadian senator, and they can't tell you whether or not you are. And my suggestion was, tell them you're fourth in line for the Kingdom of Switzerland. Nice. Does Switzerland even have a monarchy? They don't know. Do they care enough to look? Absolutely not. And I feel like so few people know anything about the Napoleonic Wars. They're so desperate so as not to appear stupid that they just wander into this fort and go, yes, the Napoleonic witches. Yes, of course. We all remember that great campaign. And of course the T-Rex. Yes, we use that again later to defeat the Nazi war machine. Because no one wants to question it and look dumb.
It's like Monty Python put a museum together. That's what that would be.
That's exactly what it sounds like.
It came from Turkey. To start off, I'm from Yorkshire, and I don't believe in nonsense. When my gran died, she died, and I never believed for a moment that she was dusting about on some cloud, waiting to have tea with the good Lord Jesus. At the same time, something has been happening in our flat for some time now, and I am fast running out of prosaic explanations. It began on a holiday we took in Turkey a while back. The 2-bedroom flat we were renting was on the cheap side, and if we didn't want to be completely consumed by mosquitoes in the night, we had to make sure all the doors and screens were closed before bed. We had also been cautioned to conserve electricity, so the lights stayed off when we were out. All of this, yet one night, we came home and the door to the unused bedroom was open, as was the door to the ensuite bathroom. Every light in the apartment was on. Nothing else was disturbed, so we dismissed it and went to bed. A night or two later, we went to turn on the air conditioning and discovered that the remote control's batteries had disappeared. To make it even more infuriating, my boyfriend Pete bought new batteries, but the things still wouldn't work. We could still operate the AC manually, but it was a nuisance. The second disappearing act was even more baffling. One night, Pete was showering immediately after I had, and somehow, in the moments between my leaving the bathroom and his entering, our shower gel had gone missing. It took a good 20 minutes to find the thing had been shoved down the back of the shower, between the wall and the glass. Who did that, or how, I haven't a clue. As I mentioned earlier, this strangeness followed us back to South Yorkshire, and not just in my flat. Recently, I walked through the door to Pete's house and realised my bracelet, which is always on my wrist, was gone. I was bereft, as it's my favourite bracelet, and I was certain it had been there when I left home. Upset and annoyed, I tromped upstairs to use the toilet, and just as I stepped on the final stair, I froze in shock. There, on the ground in front of me, was my missing bracelet. Other things have happened as well. One night when Pete was away for work, I stayed at his and heard doors slamming over and over, except they're all heavy fire doors and not likely to move on their own. When I got up to investigate, nothing was moving. Lately, the feelings of being watched have gotten worse, and I find myself constantly spinning around to see if I'm being followed. It may not sound terrible, and I don't exactly believe it's something paranormal, but it is upsetting and makes me wonder if something else is coming.
Well, nothing good, I assume.
Yeah, that sounds like it's building.
It really does.
You know, I've never heard a good story from someone who's been on vacation in Turkey.
Oh, I had a lovely time.
Okay, well, that's one. There was a woman I met on the road once who had nearly gotten into an accident in a taxi cab there. Nick was there when the big earthquake hit. Now this person apparently has Freddy Krueger follow them back.
And it was the hottest weather I've ever experienced in my life. It was 49 degrees.
Oh my God.
As soon as you moved, you sweated. It was unreal. Even I got slight sunstroke, which everybody on holiday with me found hilarious because I seem to be part lizard when I'm abroad. So I'm basically just crawl towards the sun. And yeah, it was mind-blowingly hot.
Not to be indelicate, Paul, but I think you vacationed in hell. I think your friends lied to you.
Yeah.
It was stunning, the hotel, because you could look out all across the Atlas Mountains. It was absolutely beautiful place to be. And you laid by the pool and you could watch all these people paragliding off the Atlas Mountains around you and come flying over. It was wonderful. But man, it was hot.
I've always had a little bit of a weird, like, I don't know whether to believe the stories or not. You know, when you hear stories where they say he brought something back with him, you know, because it kind of makes you think, well, what sort of spirits are these that just say, oh, fuck it, I'll go with you? Do you know what I mean? It's like, I can see the mountains, I'm in a 5-star hotel and it's sunshine and I'm going to go to Leeds.
What ghost doesn't want to live in Rotherham?
I can't stand the heat. I mean, to be fair, I'll always, Becca loves the heat and I hate it. So for holidays, that's a bone of contention every time. And like, I'm so pale that people get more tanned being around me because I reflect. Honestly, it's ridiculous. I go red and
like
a
prism.
And that's it. It's just ridiculous.
Family life. Growing up in a small mining town in Yorkshire, my family's had a lot of encounters with what you'd call the paranormal, but my younger brother Nick seems to be the focal point for many of them. The first one I can recall happened when he was 3 or 4, and he started crying about the man who sat on Bigger. Bigger Bear was his favorite stuffed animal. Each time it happened, Mum would comfort him, and it finally happened enough she started to think there was really something to it, so she brought out the old family photo album and started leafing through it with Nick on her lap. Completely unprompted, Nick pointed to one of the photos, which depicted our great-uncle Christoph, who died before both of us were born. I knew about him from Mom's stories, but she had never told any of them to Nick, or shown him his picture. Mom decided she had to do something about it, and if this really was her uncle, he'd understand. So she went into Nick's room and told him to bugger off. She said it more nicely than that, which you probably should when talking to things you cannot see or fight, and the man stopped sitting on Bigger Bear. Things did pick up in Mom and Dad's bedroom, though, with a phone wire violently shaking and an unseen hand touching hers. Again, she asked it to stop, and this time it did. The next major incident came a few years later when Nick began talking to Benjamin, his new invisible friend who happened to be a boy his age. No one thought much of this development until our older sister Nancy went into Nick's room to see what he wanted for lunch. Standing outside his room, she overheard him talking to himself and went inside to find him laying on his stomach playing with his cars. That would be unremarkable, if not for the fact that one of the cars opposite him was moving by itself. Nancy ran away screaming. When Mom got home from work that day, she again pulled out the photo albums and started flipping until my brother casually pointed. "That's Benjamin," he said, pointing to an old, worn photograph of a young boy in working-class clothes and a flat cap. My mother then told us the photo was of my grandfather's younger brother, who died at the age of 8 after being hit by a lorry. His name? You guessed it. Benjamin. He stuck around for a few more months, and eventually we noticed Nick stopped bringing him up. Well, I never saw Benjamin. I did see something one night when Nancy and I were up late playing Guardian Heroes on our Sega Saturn. Wow, this is a while ago. It was just the two of us in the house, which would ordinarily be pretty sweet, and we had the volume on the TV in her bedroom turned way up, so at first I didn't pay attention to the sounds coming from the landing, just down the hallway. In fact, I didn't have a care in the world until I happened to glance down the hall and see, from behind the door, a slender arm and what looked like a red cardigan moving quickly out of view. Internally, I started to feel the cold stirrings of panic, and that situation was not improved by Nancy, who a minute or so later said, "Is Mom home yet?" I said she wasn't, and Nancy told me to go check, but there was no way in hell I was leaving that room. We stayed there in silence for half an hour, and there wasn't another sound until Mom slammed the door on the way in and called us by name. We also had trouble with what I am told are called doppelgangers. My sister saw it first. She had a question for my dad, and so called his name when she saw him on the stairs. He ignored her, which she thought was odd, and so she assumed he hadn't heard her. She shouted louder and followed him downstairs, seeing him turn the corner into the kitchen. When she rounded the same corner a moment later, he was gone, and when she called his name a third time, she heard his voice calling from back upstairs. "What's up?" He had never been downstairs at all. Dad's turn came a few weeks later when he saw Sarah walk into the bathroom, close the door, and then heard her turn on the shower. After about half an hour, he needed the bathroom and knocked on the door, asking how long she intended to be. Sarah came out of her bedroom, asking what he was on about. Dad didn't know what to do, so he just went into the bathroom, and the shower was running sure enough, but No one was there. This other Sarah was seen once more during a visit from our older brother Daniel. It was the middle of the day, and he was sitting in the living room watching television when he heard the sound of Sarah crying from the foyer. He went in there to find her huddled on the bottom step, sobbing, and she wouldn't stop or acknowledge him no matter what he said. This worried him, obviously, so he called Mom at work and told her he was worried about Sarah and why. That's when Mom told him Sarah had gone on an overnight trip with her girlfriends. She wasn't even in the same county. When he went back to the stairs to find her, she was gone.
You know what? Doppelgangers, you don't hear enough of, I think, in ghost stories. But funny enough, in saying that, some of the stories that I've got from family and friends, there's about 2 or 3 of them where, for example, a mate's dad of mine was playing with his daughter outside in the back garden. Then he went up to the toilet. And when he came out, he caught a glimpse of her sitting on the windowsill in the bedroom. And so he went into the bedroom and said, "Oh, you got up here quick." And she disappeared. And when he looked out the window, she was still in the garden.
Oh.
And there's a few where they said, I saw X, but it is literally a ghost of the living, if you like.
Yeah, it's a strange one, that, because obviously there's a big tradition of, if you see a doppelganger, it's usually a portent of death. But clearly, the more you hear about them, the more common they become, and clearly they're not a portent of death.
Well, I tend to wonder if the whole idea of these things being a portent of death just stem from the fact that, in the past, there was absolutely jack shit to look forward to in life except for death. Only bad things ever happened. So you're like, well, something unusual just happened. I assume death is on its way. You know, like, what fresh horror awaits me in the world today? Well, probably death. Okay.
We encountered a doppelganger of me at a restaurant. I'm going to say we encountered. It was me and Becca went for a meal in this French restaurant in Liverpool. And when we went in, the look on the maitre d's face when we walked in was absolute shock, revulsion, confusion. He sat us down and I went to Becca, God, what was wrong with the face on him then? And he came over to take our wine order and he was still the same face. And then his face just relaxed. And he said, "I'm really sorry." He said, "You might be wondering why I've just been looking at you strangely." He said, I said, "We've just been talking about it. What's up?" He said, "Someone the absolute double of you has just been in this restaurant with a blonde girl." He said, and he had the same outfit on. And I thought genuinely you've went out and came in with a different woman. I was like, fucking hell, what do you think? I'm just going to order salad now because I've just sat through a 3-course meal already.
Yeah, you got worms.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but he said the only reason that he twigged it wasn't me was because I had glasses on. Apparently, he said, and then I started to think, no, there's no way he's done that.
Superman, is that you?
Unless I'm due to drop dead anytime soon, and it was a portent of death.
Well, I guess at some point we're all going to die, so theoretically it is a portent of death. It's just how long it takes to actually happen.
Yeah.
I'd have asked him if he'd got a tab still open, Kevin, stuck all the food on.
That's what I should have done, yeah.
What's your most expensive wine? I'll have 5 bottles.
It's funny because sometimes people will say, "Oh, I've seen your doppelganger," either to me or about someone I know, and then they'll show you a picture, and you think, "Have you recently sustained a head injury?" This guy's like a 6-foot tall Chinese basketball player, and I don't know what about him made you think it was me, but I'm really, really worried about your cognitive abilities.
Yeah.
This is like the scene in Hannibal where Will can't draw a clock. I'm concerned that there is something really wrong with your brain.
The new house. My grandfather died in 2005, and while he wasn't a wealthy man, his assets were dispersed enough that handling the estate was a nightmare, and by the time we got his affairs in order, it was the spring of 2006. Since my father and I were his only surviving relatives, and he was too much of a bastard to have friends, we ended up inheriting grandfather's house in Bradford. It was a 2-bedroom Edwardian, and in its day was practically a show home, but neglect and what I have to imagine years of being exposed to the radioactive bastardry of my granddad had degraded the house to such a state that we needed to enact major repairs on it before moving in. Since we hadn't been to visit in a very long time, by now you understand why, we didn't know any of our new neighbours, and so whilst repairs were happening, Dad and I got to know some of them. They were all as kind as could be, but you could tell no one was missing the house's previous tenant. A few of them also made oblique references to there being things wrong with the house, which of course we took to mean structural issues that would need to be addressed during the renovations, but that was not the case. By late summer 2006, The work was done and we moved in. Before moving into Grandad's house, we had lived in a terraced house with neighbours on either side, so having a detached home all to ourselves was a novelty, and when things felt off at first, I assumed that was the reason. It started with sleeplessness. No matter what I did, I couldn't get down and stay down. It always felt as though I was being watched, and my heart would race, seemingly for no reason. On a couple of occasions, I brought this up to Dad, who was a religious man, and he'd always bring it back round to why I probably needed more Jesus in my life. He even had a priest come in and bless the place, but none of it moved the needle in the slightest. The house still felt awful. A few weeks after the blessing was when my father finally became... I'll do that again. A few weeks after the blessing was when my father finally became party to some of this activity. We got back from the football game and our whole house smelled like, well, if there's a dumpster in the hell where they store all the dirty nappies, it smelled like that. We scoured the whole house, eventually using a bleach solution to clean just about everything, but it never went all the way away. Sometimes it goes for days at a time, but then it returns, usually seeming to stick to one room at a time. It's a horrid thing. The banging came next. Cupboards in the kitchen opening and closing in the night, and the sound of shuffling outside our bedrooms. Of course, we get up each time to check, and there's never anyone there. But once we're back in our beds, it starts right up again. I'm the first to admit I don't know much about the paranormal, but after speaking to people who do, my conclusion is what we experienced was a poltergeist. For evidence, the people I spoke to pointed at our most dramatic encounter to date, which was also a tipping point as afterward the activity started to ebb. It was a fall evening, around 11 p.m, and I was sitting on the couch watching television as Dad was doing his rounds double-checking locks before heading to bed. He'd been up there for maybe 10 minutes when I started to get thirsty and wandered in the direction of the kitchen for a drink. The first thing I noticed was that the radio above the sink was on, which it hadn't been a moment before. Then I saw that the back door, which Dad had just locked not long before, was wide open and there was a puddle of water on the floor. My first assumption was that someone had broken in and was hiding in the cupboard under the stairs. So I ran upstairs to get my father and told him what was going on. Dad is a strong guy, but the idea of a silent burglar doing a Harry Potter under the stairs spooked even him, and he gingerly edged towards the top of the stairs, shouting, "Whoever you are, the police are on their way." Throwing open that cupboard door may still be the bravest thing I've seen anyone do, and it was all for naught, as there was no one in there. The radio in the kitchen was still playing, the water was still on the floor, and the heavy rear door, a fire door, was wide open, with no apparent sign of forced entry. I can't tell you how much it bothered me that I was only feet away from the kitchen and heard nothing until the radio started up. My sole consolation is that after this, the activity eased off. I've since moved away, but Dad is still in the house and says apart from the odd cupboard banging open in the night, which by now is familiar enough to be kind of a dark lullaby, all is quiet. So there we go.
Yeah, it's definitely a poltergeist, that.
It's kind of a trope city, that one, isn't it? Really, foul odours, pools of water, moving objects.
Banging cupboards.
Now, I have to know, is there a tradition in the UK, as there is here, of sleeping with a baseball bat next to your bed?
Depends where you're from, really.
If baseball was more popular, yeah. It's usually a cricket bat.
Okay, so because when I was rewriting that story, because obviously everyone knows Luke finds the stories, and then they're from various archives online, and then I rewrite them. And I don't change usually locations or things like that, but sometimes I'll change perspective, and I kind of have to flesh it out a bit. And I almost added the detail that he picks up a baseball bat, and I thought, I don't know if that's a thing in the UK or if it would be cricket bat.
Becca's actually got a tomahawk. It's a tomahawk. It's a wooden tomahawk, really heavy, next to the bed. She sleeps. There's no metal on it. It's just a complete wooden tomahawk she got given as a souvenir once.
Okay.
And that sits on the side of her bed. And when we started living together, I said, well, you've got me now, you can get rid of the tomahawk. And she just laughed, and it's still there now.
The judgment.
I used to, when I lived on my own for yonks, I had some kendo swords under my bed.
Wow. That feels like it would be unwieldy to try and sword fight someone.
I've got a short one as well. There's two.
Oh, okay.
You've got the long one that you can raise over your head, but you've also got a very nice, short, stout one as well. That's quite manoeuvrable in certain situations, I have to say.
Okay, well, that implies use, and now I'm curious.
Yeah, very sturdy wood.
Okay. There's a brain-damaged burglar out there somewhere.
Struggling to draw a clock.
I was once at a party when I was working at the lead mill. We went back to one of the staff's house for a drink and stuff. And it was a warm summer's evening, so we got the front windows open. So there's like 6 or 7 of us sat in the front room, playing music, chatting. And we just sat there, and all of a sudden this leg came through the window. And I'm like, what? What's going on here? And it was somebody trying to burgle us. And I was like, is this guy deaf? Like 7 people laughing. And he's trying to burgle the house, climbing in through the window. He's like, oh, sorry, wrong house. And I thought, yeah, of course it is, mate.
So we got out the kendo stick.
Yeah. He was never seen again.
Yeah, we rearranged that clock over and over.
How we ended up at the bottom of the cellar steps, I'll never know.
8 or 9 times. When I used to live alone, when I had my house back in Revelstoke, I would get up probably 8 or 9 times in the night with my baseball bat, edging towards the top of the stairs, shouting down there, hello? Because the burglar's going to respond to you, right? Oh, yeah, sorry, it's just me.
Yeah.
Go back to bed, I'm a demon.
That's right.
Oh, you have a bat? I think I'll leave.
Oh, man. You're trying to deepen your voice to sound tougher, who's there?
No, I think it's more scary if you raise your voice.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Pissed off Mickey Mouse is upstairs and he's coming for you.
Goodbye, Dawn. Room number 4. During my teen years, my father was the manager of a country pub nearish to Sheffield. It was an isolated place, converted from a farmhouse and barn into an inn with 6 rooms spread over 2 floors. Our first night there, we all stayed in different rooms, simply for the novelty of the experience, and I ended up in room number 3. Everything seemed normal for approximately 8 seconds. Then Boomer, our huge Rottweiler dog, wouldn't leave my room. Dad was adamant about Boomer not getting used to sleeping in the rooms, so eventually I had to call him down, as the dog just would not go. Dad tried everything, and even managed to get him to retreat to the hallway briefly. But not an hour had gone by when Boomer was back, scratching and whining at my door. Imagine, if you will, what it takes for a dog that size to be frightened, and you understand why my first night in the pub was an uneasy one. The next weekend, when it was again Dad's turn to have me, I stayed in room number 4, just down the stairs from his room and next to the emergency exit. Forget Boomer, I had my own hackles up just being in that room, and I couldn't settle into sleep. Finally, around 3 a.m, I got sick of having the TV on, but still left the lights on as I lay there. Poor Boomer was now no longer allowed upstairs at all, and I began to hear him get agitated, barking loudly in a panicky fashion. I'd never heard from him. I'm not proud of this, but I was too frightened to go down there and see what was happening. Moments after Boomer started up, a sound began to come through my door. It was as if someone was trying to use the emergency exit's push bar, but not pushing quite hard enough to open it. Then came the footsteps, heavy and crashing, and the shadow that passed from left to right in front of my door. Dad to the rescue! Assuming he had it all in hand, I didn't bother calling to him and finally crawled into bed. It wasn't until the next morning that I found out it hadn't been him at all. He hadn't heard Boomer either, he explained, nor had he left his room at any point. The situation didn't improve when my father's new partner Jenny and her son Malcolm moved in. I don't blame them for that. They were fine people, but whatever was living there didn't seem to care about who it affected or how. Pubs typically go through a lot of staff, but this particular pub went through even more, and I think a lot of it had to do with the kitchen. It was built in what had been the old barn, which is where one of the previous owners allegedly hung himself, and whenever we were there, it felt angry. enough so that staff preferred not to be left alone there. Objects would go missing, sometimes turning up damaged, sometimes not turning up at all, and no matter how many of the cookers were going at any one time, it was always so cold, everyone wore jumpers. If you've ever worked in a commercial kitchen, you know how unusual that is. There were 3 things that happened which accelerated Dad's leaving the position and the pub, the last of which was also the simplest. Every night, no matter how tightly we locked the pub's back door, we would find it open again in the morning. Not unlocked, you understand. The deadbolt would still be extended, but open. The second most unnerving thing to happen was when Malcolm's friend David stayed over one weekend in room 7. Up to this point, room 7 had always been used sparingly, mostly for storage, so it would be fair to say it had been sitting empty for months. That night, both boys woke up at different times of night to find what they assumed was the other standing over them, looking down. It wasn't until the morning, when each asked why the other had been watching them sleep, that they then realised neither of them had gotten up. David didn't come back after that, and after the sitter incident, Malcolm didn't want to either. The sitter incident was without a doubt the biggest reason Jenny convinced Dad to find another job. It happened one night when we came home from a football match to find the pub in darkness. This in itself wasn't unusual. Despite Dad having been an electrical engineer, he'd never been able to identify why the lights in the pub would periodically shut themselves off, usually all at once. It just became one of those things you lived with. Since this wasn't unusual, none of us thought much about it when we entered the building. We did a quick check round to make sure all the doors and windows were secure, and that's when, as a group, we discovered the sitter. Right at the back of the restaurant area, seated at a table, was the shape of a man, but entirely dark. He had no features, yet I was certain he was looking directly at us, very much aware of our presence, but not moving. The lights slowly started to come back on, weakly, and not all at once. As the area surrounding the sitter grew brighter, he stayed a solid black mass, and the 4 of us were having none of it. We ran back outside and stayed there until all the lights had come on, at which point we ventured back inside to find the sitter gone.
Wow. That last part is terrifying. That black shape.
Yeah. Pubs are strange, though. I mean, it's one of those things, obviously, as somebody that ran them for very long. I was always very disappointed that no pub I ever ran was haunted.
How many did you run, Paul?
About 4 or 5. I mean, there was a couple of free. I mean, obviously, I was bar manager at the Lead Mill for a bit. And that was sometimes a bit spooky because, obviously, if the alarm went off at 5 in the morning, you'd have to get a taxi out on your own.
That's terrifying. No way.
And go and investigate a massive old building. And more often than not, it was usually that if it flooded, sometimes the river would come in through the cellar.
Oh, Jesus.
Wow.
And it would make the barrels float, and they'd trip out the alarms, the motion detectors.
Oh, man.
And which is not something you want to look at either, because you're like, geez, I've got to clean that up tomorrow. Brilliant.
God.
Yeah. For our listeners, if you want to hear more about haunted bars, the new episode of Sunken Library for patrons is specifically about haunted bars in Canada. We talk with Nick Nedden from the Flower Hour podcast about the haunted bar that he used to own in Amherstburg, Ontario. And then we also talk a couple haunted bars here in Victoria, actually both of which are in my neighborhood. And then there's a third, a listener story from Quebec. So patreon.com/ghost story, guys, if you want to hear more about that.
It was quite interesting as well. A few years ago, a ghost book came out about haunted locations in Sheffield. And my last pub was in it. Never been haunted in a million years.
Really? You didn't experience anything there?
I don't know who they spoke to because it came out when I was still there.
Oh, jeez.
I was like, I don't recognize. Oh, yeah, you can hear ghostly footsteps upstairs. No, somebody lives upstairs. What are you talking about?
They are very, very ghostly footsteps, though.
Yeah. You definitely hear them, yeah.
It's like that when you see people say, oh, look at this pint glass exploding in this pub. If you've ever worked in a pub, the one thing you do not think is surprising is an exploding glass, because they're always blowing up.
Yeah, or sliding across the bar as well, just when the aquaplane.
Yeah.
That reminds me, Kev, you were talking about this on one of your Patron shows recently. There was an author who writes, I want to say haunted Liverpool books, and the first few are really, really good.
Yeah.
And then you said they've now written about 62 of them.
Yeah, exactly.
And they have taken the expected nosedive in quality, because after a while, there are only so many stories.
Exactly, yeah. And it's one of them, the first few almost gained cult-like following in terms of because they were all anecdotal stories, which is what you want, isn't it, really?
Of course, yeah.
And then it started to tail off around maybe book 6, because it became obvious then the individual in question seemed to be clutching at straws, and there was a lot of embellishment, and they got a little bit more fantastical and romantic, and they weren't just a cleaner from the local building that's told you what they've experienced. They were now like 2nd century warlock of the time, who I know all about, of course. You're like,
course,
right, okay.
Yeah, I read one of the. I know exactly who you're on about, and I remember reading one of his stories, because I think he's got a regular column in one of the newspapers, and one of them was one of those amazing stories where somebody was so terrified they died on their own.
Yeah.
Well, how do we know that happened then?
Yeah, there's about 4 or 5 which I've picked out of that particular genre where the story is there's a great one where someone's playing cards with the devil, and the devil wins, so the devil takes them to hell, and the person's never seen again. And you're like, so where am I getting this story from then?
He's dictating it as it happens.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, he wrote a great song about it. It's called "The Devil Went Down to Georgia." That's a documentary. A lot of people don't know that.
Yeah.
The Green Man. From what I gather, most people retain no memories of their early childhood. Some new research I was reading suggests that this is because your brain is busy generating new cells and so doesn't store long-term memories. According to that same research, this childhood amnesia stops around 7, which leaves someone like me, who remembers very specific moments from early childhood, with a few questions. Did my brain choose long-term memories over new brain cells? If not, then where does this memory come from? Most importantly, was the Green Man real, and is he still out there somewhere? Growing up, my family lived in the village of Birkinshaw, in West Yorkshire. Our house was brand new, at least in English terms, being built on a patch of farmland only some 30 years before. It was there, as a toddler, that I have my first memory, seeing the Green Man. He was green, of course, and tall, with red eyes and horns, and he radiated menace. Even as a very young child, barely out of infancy, who didn't know the word evil, I understood malevolent intent. My sister did too, because at various points in our childhood she also told our parents about a dark figure standing over her in her room, but our parents always dismissed us. The Green Man appeared several times before I was 6, and every time was the same, looming in the darkness, visible enough to cause me distress, almost like he was trying to provoke a fear reaction. If I was the only person who had seen him, I might be more inclined to write this off as childhood hallucinations, but then when I was 6, someone else saw him too. Our school had a rule about not going out back. I don't remember exactly why, but it probably had something to do with there not being enough supervision. Whatever the reason, a friend and I had snuck around back one day to play when he pointed off into the distance. "Look," he said. "Can you see that?" Following his gaze, I saw the Green Man out there in the field, digging with what looked like a pickaxe. This happened on 2 different occasions. Around the same time, my sister and I were at our grandparents' house when, in the middle of the night, I thought I heard someone downstairs making breakfast. Of course, this didn't make any sense, but if breakfast was going around, I wasn't going to miss out, so I crept downstairs, only to find the entire first floor dark and empty, except for a tall shadow in the lounge, darker than the night around it. I ran back upstairs. For years, I thought sightings of the Green Man were limited to me and the people around me. But then, a few years ago, I met 2 different people on an internet forum who had also seen him. The first was from the city of Chicago, and happened when this person was 5 years old. They were awoken in the middle of the night by a metallic clanging sound coming from their closet. Rising from bed and walking over to check it out, they found the closet as they left it. But when they turned back toward bed, the Green Man was on the wall, grinning at them cruelly. They ran to bed and hid under the covers, expecting him to be gone when they looked again, but instead he was right above them. The Green Man seemed to delight in their fear, and let out a kind of wild shriek before skittering off to disappear into a dark corner of the ceiling. When this person was 16, they met a third person who knew the Green Man and had seen him in the daytime as well. The other person I met online didn't have exactly the same experience. They used to dream about a 2-foot-tall, green-skinned, red-eyed imp who would seemingly try to goad them into chasing it into a darkened room. This person told me that one night they had had enough of the creature's taunting and were just about to give chase when their deceased grandmother walked in through another door and cautioned them against it. Grandma then told the creature to bugger off, which it did. It's been a while since I've seen the Green Man, and my only concern is that writing this story may somehow attract his notice. I suppose we'll see.
Wow. Isn't it interesting that, like, the more terrifying and, like, you know, absolutely nightmare-inducing something's described as, the more simplistic name they seem to have, like the Green Man. You know, like if it's like the devil and the blah, 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 it's normally something which is like just a shadow, whereas the more something gets more of a personification of like horns and tail and fangs, that they have a really simplistic name.
It's so much that to try and describe it in complex language would almost be pointless.
Yeah, it's almost like it doesn't need a scary name because it's so terrifying.
Yeah, that's it.
Did it say at one point it had a pickaxe as well within that story?
Yeah, when they spotted it in the daytime out at the school digging, they said it was digging with a pickaxe.
Because interestingly, I used to have, when I used to live with my dad, and we moved there when I was about maybe 9 years old, there was a tree, one solitary tree in the middle of the back garden, a really big old tree. And I can still visualize it now. I used to have like a little daydream when I'd be falling asleep about an orange man that had a pickaxe that would be at the tree, and he'd have horns.
Really?
Yeah, but I was associated him more with like a leprechaun type of figure because he wasn't tall or anything.
Right.
He was really small, like about maybe 2 feet tall, which is why my skin crawled a bit when he said that the other fella's seen like a 2 foot tall one, because I was thinking, when I seen pickaxe, I was like, God, I used to think in my head, I'd visualize that tree, something to do with something buried under the tree, but I'd see this like orange 2 foot tall man with horns and a pickaxe, only in my head, like as I'm imagining it, obviously. But it rung a few bells there, which it was like, oh, fucking hell, maybe not.
Well, it does make you wonder, right? Because there enough of these things happen that there are enough common threads that you start to think, okay, maybe this isn't something we're imagining.
Yeah.
You know, especially like as you say, like what you're describing there is kind of an idle daydream. But I do tend to think that these things, especially if they're persistent, they're coming from somewhere. And I'm pretty sure, aren't there stories in folklore, I want to say particularly about the Oshie, there being some kind of significance to trees which are set apart from everything else? I want to say someone sent us this fairly recently, but there is apparently some kind of, I want to say paranormal significance to this notion of trees. Yeah, trees set off by themselves, almost as gateways of a kind.
Wow.
Yeah. I know in Ireland they have a tradition, especially I think it's hawthorn, that you will basically have a big field with a hawthorn tree just on its own because it's connected to the Fae.
Interesting.
I've no idea what sort of tree this was. I'm not up on all that.
Yeah.
Oh, me either. There's tall trees and short trees.
Yeah.
That's all I know.
It's still there. I'll find out. And then my dad will probably think, my dad's never really took to my interests. Let me put it that way. When I said we had a ghost podcast, he was a bit like, and I think he's still got a normal job. I was like, yeah, don't worry about it. But when I say, what makes your tree in case it's a doorway to the other world, I'm pretty sure he'll disown me, but I'll find out.
Just pretend you're really, really getting into botany. I think that's trees, right?
Yeah.
So what kind of tree is that you got back there? It's like when I pretend to give a shit about cars and I'll ask someone like, oh, what are you driving? Oh, nice, good mileage. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I do that in taxis. Not a clue. They could say, oh, you only get 5 to the mile, but I have no idea what that means. So that's the question.
That doesn't sound like very many, or is many, depending on your point of view.
Yeah. What I know about cars, you can fit at the back of a stamp.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, 1,000%. I like periodically I'll refill my oil or my coolant or something, and I feel very manly, and I go around like kissing my biceps for a good half an hour. I'm certain Nikki's going to leave me one day, but I'm just like, oh yeah, hey babe, I just filled up the oil in the car. Don't ask me what the oil does once I fill it up because I don't fucking know, but I filled it real good.
Yeah, I tend to know more about weird creatures like the Lusca from the Caribbean than I do about cars.
Yeah. Anything filed under masculine tasks, It's normally just got a big cross by my name. It really has.
Yeah, same here. Same here. I was, back when I was working at the dispensary, something needed doing underneath one of the tables. I want to say it was hooking up a computer because this is one of the few things I can do. And so I because I didn't want to get my shirt dusty, I took it off, and I always wear, as you can see, I always wear an undershirt underneath it, full on Andy cap, sleeveless. And so I came up from underneath the desk, and one of the gals who was working there, who, bless her, a little bit troubled, but she came back and she said, "Man, you look manly as fuck right now." And I thought, well, I'll never hear those words again.
Kill me now.
Yeah. Let's not tell her I was down there plugging in a computer.
A holiday in Staithes. When my family told me we were going to spend our annual holiday in England, I got excited. After all, who wouldn't love to spend a week in London, one of the world's great cities? As it turned out, my family was less interested in bright lights and culture and more interested in crab fishing and naps. Instead of London, we ended up spending a week in the town of Staithes, in North Yorkshire. This was, shall we say, a step down. All due respect to Staithes, once I got over my disappointment and started doing some research, I realised the place had a lot of history going on. It was once a bustling port with a massive fishing industry and thriving black market. Below the streets, a network of tunnels allowed smugglers to move their goods without being spotted by authorities. Bucolic seaside towns I could care less about, but as a young person with an interest in the paranormal, the prospect of tunnels and the possible psychic consequences of shady underground businesses were much more appealing. Later, I would learn that my parents had been informed that the cottage we would be renting was haunted, but because they frowned upon my weird preoccupations, they chose not to tell me. To me, this validates my experiences even more, as I was not expecting to have them, at least not where I was staying. My room in the cottage was on the 3rd floor, in the attic, and right away I felt uncomfortable, like someone was watching and they were not too pleased to have me there. The situation didn't improve later that evening when I came back from crabbing in the harbour. I could hear whispers around me in the dark, and invisible hands brushing up against me. The following morning, my parents acted strangely when I brought it up, giving each other a meaningful look. But because they'd cleverly chosen not to share their knowledge with me, I didn't understand what it meant. Instead, the absolute bastards told me it was my imagination. The next thing to happen was the lights misbehaving, either turning off when we were home or turning on when we were out. Then, after a night out at the pub, we came home to see a cabinet door open and then slam shut all by itself. That night, I was overcome with dread whilst taking my shower. I could smell stale tobacco, despite none of us being smokers. On our last night, all this high strangeness led me to almost breaking my neck on the stairs. You see, I'd gone up to my room to grab a book and was on my way back down when I noticed the light behind me, which I'd turned off, was back on. So I very quickly dashed over, turned it off, and then made for the stairs again. I was on my way back down when the light behind me flashed back on, and despite knowing how crazy this sounds, it felt like I was pushed from behind. I fell all the way down to the 2nd floor, where my mother ran to my side. Thankfully, I was bruised and startled, but not injured. Staithes may be an interesting place, and I do like stories of the strange and unusual, but as we flew back home, it occurred to me I'd found my line in the sand. From here on out, I visit haunted places. I don't sleep there.
Yeah, and that takes us back to the being pissed drunk if you're going to be in those kinds of places thing.
Exactly, yeah. You really have to be.
That's surprising because Staithes is one of those hidden gems in Yorkshire that if you don't know anything about it, you've probably never heard of it. It's on the coast and it's one of those fishing villages where all the houses are painted on the harbour.
Oh, lovely.
And it's one of those really weird places. It had it became like an artist hotspot where the Northern Impressionists would knock about and created like this art community there. So they even have an art festival, I think. Well, they used to. They used to have an art festival where people would turn their houses into galleries on the street, and you could just walk around the village, and it's all pieces of artwork everywhere.
Oh, wow.
It does make you think. I mean, in that story, it doesn't say where that person originated from who told the story, but it does make you think if they flew in, they're obviously abroad somewhere, how that family managed to find states to even go to. You know, it's not like you walk in a travel agent and say, give me North Yorkshire's most local place, please. I want an art festival in the midst of nowhere.
I'm looking for bucolic fishing villages. What do you got?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I'd like to stop somewhere near Whitby that isn't Whitby.
It's a very specific set of requirements.
The Boy. The story I'm about to tell you happened when I was 3 years old, so I'm relying on my parents' memories to tell the story. At the time, we were living in Scarborough, North Yorkshire, and Mum says a lot of odd things happened in the house. Items going missing and turning up weeks, sometimes months later. Cold spots. Feeling as though someone was following you around. She said that putting me to bed was a nightmare, because every time she tucked me in, I'd come running back downstairs shortly thereafter. Every time, she says, I tell her that the boy under my bed keeps frightening me and won't let me sleep. Of course, she would tell me it was all a dream, take me back upstairs and tuck me in. Eventually, I'd go off to sleep. Dad worked early shift, which meant he was often in bed before even me, so the duty of dealing with these nighttime scares often fell on Mum. Then, one night, I had a particularly bad episode and Dad woke up. Mum says she heard him walk into my room, say something she couldn't hear. Then he came downstairs to find me sitting on her lap, and his face went white. Mum says it took days for him to come round and talk about his reaction, and when he did, it shocked her as well. Dad told her he had woken up to sounds coming from my bedroom and had gone in there to tell me to stop playing and go to sleep. He said I wasn't in bed, but for some reason was underneath it. So he told me to get up into bed and behave, then walked downstairs to talk to Mum about my behaviour. Of course, there I was in her lap, so who the hell was this little boy he'd seen under my bed? We never got an answer, and the nighttime visits continued, though they no longer remember for how long.
That's horrible.
Yeah, no thanks.
Frankly, I would set about trying to forget how long it happened myself. I would be trying to forget the entire episode.
Yeah.
I'd be breaking into Paul's house just hoping he hits me with a kendo stick.
Would there'd be no room under Paul's bed for a ghostly child. It's full of martial arts equipment.
Yeah.
Nice try, my son. Those are my nunchucks.
Once again, you've got another doppelganger story, really, haven't you? Because obviously the dad was confused enough to just presume it was his son.
Yeah, it's a very good shout. And like the ones I was talking about before, but you've heard from friends and family, interestingly, they all concern children as well. And it's normally their children. You know, as I said, the guy thought he saw his daughter. In this story, the guy thinks he's seen his son. It's very interesting.
Yeah, which falls into the kind of changeling mythos as well, but that's more obviously a traditional Irish piece of legend and lore rather than English. So it's perturbing. And I would imagine as a paranormal experience, it's probably one of the most unusual, because these kind of stories don't get reported that often, and it makes you wonder just how many times it actually happens and people just brush it off or try to forget about it because it is so scary.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about this notion that oftentimes our memories actively try to fight our perception of these things. You know, they just sort of shove it into the subliminal consciousness. But I wonder if that's because it is such a violation of what we consider to be the rules of reality. It's not just that we are seeing, we're not just that we're seeing something that doesn't fit. We're seeing something that doesn't fit and potentially could be a massive threat.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine how traumatizing it would be to see yourself.
Yeah, but also the threat is more than a physical threat. I think it's the mental threat that your brain protects you from, because
absolutely.
I've spoken, like loads of times on this particular topic. If you if you experience something, the survival instinct is to rationalize it, because if you accept it for what it actually is, let's say if this cup in front of me starts floating in front of me and then slams against the wall, I'd be fighting to rationalize that, because otherwise I have to accept that there's a force I don't understand that's got the capability to hurt me that no one else will believe if I told them. So please rationalize it before I lose friends, family, sanity.
Well, I think that applies to any aspect of the weird, be it a UFO sighting or a cryptid encounter or even a paranormal one. You will always try, and we often hear of situations where there'll be somebody caught in a situation where one person just will point blank reach for the most outlandish normal explanation, in spite of everything else that seems to be happening to them and everybody around them.
Yeah, there are times when the prosaic explanations these people come up with actually require more mental gymnastics than just saying, oh, well, that was weird. Or than just saying, what, well, it's my evil doppelganger who's portending doom,
Yeah, there was a lady, like a paranormal researcher in the UK, Paul, you're probably much more educated on this topic than I, but she wrote a book about, she coined the phrase, just one of those things, or jutes. It was in 14 Times a while back. And she basically says she was gathering examples of these jutes and said everybody's got a jute, everyone's got a just one of those thing events, which on their own you can just, even if you don't rationalize it, you can put away as I won't think about that, it won't happen again, and I can't comprehend it. So, but collectively, these all add up to paranormal experience.
Oh, sure. I mean, I would argue that's what all of our shows are essentially about, is things that people kind of experience and try and write off. And I mean, honestly, if the Daily Grail actually had a great write-up on James Randi, like a great obituary on James Randi. Yeah. And they were talking about how his brand of skepticism, after a while, didn't make much sense because it was just about shouting people down.
Yeah.
And I mean, really, that's our shows are kind of the antithesis of that. We're bringing these experiences together and I mean, hopefully telling people, hey, you're not alone. Other people are experiencing this too, but also just sort of defiantly saying, like, yeah, this shit is adding up to something. What it is, I don't think we'll ever know. And I'm always really suspicious of people who claim to know.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about things which are fundamentally, I think, unknowable. I don't think any of us have I shouldn't say any of us. I don't think most of us have the necessary perception to even fully look one of these things in the face.
Yeah.
Never mind understand the world from which it comes. Yeah. But one of the things that always gets me when, say, people talk about dying, when atheists talk about dying, they say, well, this idea that you go to heaven and you play pinochle with Jesus for eternity, that sounds boring. Even the TV show The Good Place, which I thought was a really great show and a very smart sitcom, we run up against, I want to say, sort of the limitations of our own imagination. Because I think that it is very likely, if there is a world beyond this one, and I hope there is, because, nothing sounds shitty, it very likely bears no relationship to anything that's come before it.
Yeah.
You think about being in the womb, and nothing in there bears any relationship to the world you're going to experience outside it. And so why is it so hard to imagine that the world that follows this one and the parts of it which interact with our own are so fundamentally different from what we know that we just can't make sense of it? And so for someone to say, well, of course you die, when you die there's nothing, because otherwise it's the world again and you have a job and it becomes a whole joke. But I think odds are, again, if something comes next, it's so different to what we know that it is virtually impossible to describe.
I think you nailed it before when you said that, like, it doesn't matter which side of the fence that you sit on, whether you're a skeptic or you're a believer, if you claim to know what's going on, you don't have a clue.
Yeah.
If you're a skeptic and you say it can't happen because X, right? Okay, so you're the most intelligent person, and that might be the most arguably, in inverted speech marks, intelligent thing to say in 2021. But what was the most intelligent thing to say in 1242? You probably would have been burnt as a witch.
Think about that jackass who went on record. I can't remember who it is, but this was before the invention of, I want to say sometime in the 1800s, this guy said, anything that can be invented has been invented. Imagine being that schmuck.
Yeah.
Someone comes up with a radio and he's like, oh, fuck, I better delete that blog post.
Yeah.
I mean,
or just write now at the start.
Yeah.
I mean, my concept of this is that energy, and humans are energy, cannot be destroyed. So where does it go? In whatever aspect, whether you're a religious person or an atheist or whatever, you cannot deny the law of thermodynamics. And that is that we are energy, and energy cannot be destroyed. So it must go somewhere, whether that's into the creation of ghosts or it becomes absorbed into the world around it. I don't know. All I know is that energy can't be destroyed.
Yeah.
I mean, the interesting thing that which you fall down a rabbit hole very quickly of is there's also the argument that a thought creates energy. At a very minuscule level, a thought creates energy. So you then start getting dipping into wells, which I don't like to dip in, which is the whole law of attraction stuff and all that carry on, because I'm not much of a believer in that. But at the same time, if, as you quite rightly say, energy can't be destroyed or created, and the thought gives off some energy, then I don't know. For wiser men than me.
Yeah,
fair. And me. This is a long conversation, and we're going to continue it, but for you guys, we're going to take a quick break. Hey there, listeners. Before you reach for that skip 15 seconds ahead button, I promise you this isn't an ad. We wanted to take a minute to talk to you about mental health. On this show, I've always tried to be as honest and open as possible about my struggles with depression and anxiety, because even though we've come a long way towards acknowledging the very real damage these things can do, there is still way too much lingering stigma about reaching out for help. And when you start to feel like there's no help, it's easy to start feeling like there's no hope. But Paul has joined me today to remind you there is always hope and there's always help.
We're not going to try and talk you out of self-harming right now, because we know that's not how it works. Instead, what we wanted to do was tell you something now and hope that should things get bad, you'll remember it and make a phone call or send a text message before you make any permanent decisions. As someone who knows all too well just how important mental health can be, it's never too late to reach out.
In Canada, the number to call is 133-456-4566. In the USA, the number to call is 1-800-273-8255.
In the UK, the number to call is 116-123, or text SHOUT, that's SHOUT, to 85258. In Australia, the number to call is 131114.
However bad shit seems, it will pass. And no matter what your brain might be telling you at any given moment, and believe me when I say I know this intimately, there are people who love you and people who care deeply about how you treat yourself. Should a time come when you find yourself despairing, please know that we've both been where you are, and there is a way back to the world. Take care. Welcome back. Thanks as always to the rest of the team, Luke Greensmith, Anthony Germaine, and Sarah Kent, for everything they do to help both me and Paul out with putting this show together. I couldn't do it without you guys. Sarah in particular really came through this week with a terrifying photo of a Humpty Dumpty from a roadside attraction back in the 1970s. I don't know, I think this thing was somewhere in BC, but it was truly chilling, this photograph of these two kids next to this thing. And she came up with this really horrifying variation on the Humpty Dumpty rhyme. And so I couldn't help myself. I actually ended up turning it into like a 45-second little short that I've put up on all our social media. So if you want to see the true nightmare Humpty Dumpty, check it out it's on the Facebook page, it's on our YouTube channel. It's pretty much everywhere we have social media. But yeah, so wonderful horrors like that are what those guys bring to us, and I appreciate the absolute hell out of it. Big thanks, of course, to our very first guest of Ghost Story Guys 2.0, Kevin Eustace from We Need to Talk About Ghosts. Kev, thanks for being here, man. This has been a ton of fun.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, no, we've had a good laugh. I always enjoy coming on.
Tell everyone where they can find you online. If they, I assume they know where you are, but just in case they don't.
Yeah, in case you don't, just search for We Need to Talk About Ghosts, wherever you get your podcast from. With little fanfare, we just hit our 200th episode, believe it or not.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I didn't realise we had until I was putting up the last one. It said episode 203. I was like, well, you missed something there, didn't you? Missed an opportunity there. So yeah, there's over 200 episodes on there. If you've heard me talk outside of the story segments on this show, that's generally what you're going to hear on that show too. It's quite laid back. I just really listen to stories out, and they're all allegedly true.
Make sure to check it out, folks. And also check out Kev's music. He very modestly decided not to promote it, so I'm going to do it for him because I'm a big fan. There is a song on the album. Is it Songs I Don't Appreciate?
Yeah.
Dance Tonight.
Yeah.
Is, I think, one of the best songs I've ever heard.
Oh, thanks, dude.
No, that's not a word of a lie. I'm not kissing your ass. I have listened to that song a fuck ton. It is a great song. Wow. Folks, if you listen to only one of Kevin's tracks, listen to Dance Tonight. It's on streaming platforms everywhere. It is a brilliant tune.
Well, thank you very much. Didn't expect that. So there's another check I have to write.
That's right. All right. And of course, thank you, Paul, for helping keep me on track. And if you want to find more from Paul is the host of the Mysteries and Monsters podcast. And just remind everyone where they can find you online and what you got coming up.
Yeah, you can find us wherever you look for Mysteries and Monsters across all streaming platforms and social media. Coming up this month, I've got some varied topics. We've got Stephen Bassett talking about the truth embargo and UAPs in the American Congress this week. I've got Chad Lewis and Kevin Lee Nelson taking me on a cryptid hunt down in Illinois for the Big Muddy Monster. And I've got a couple of very exciting shows coming up covering my favorite subject, which is poltergeists.
Yes, that secret show is going to be, I think, going to be a very, very good one.
Fingers crossed.
Thank you very much, guys. Again, I had a great, great time tonight.
No, thank you. It's really good experience.
And now it's time to thank our patrons.
This one's for the patrons.
Patrons, I know I say this every time, but I mean it more every time I do. Thank you so much for your support of this show, for your support of me. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate it. The show is my livelihood. The show is how I pay my bills. It is a wonderful thing. You know, I realized recording this episode with Paul and Kevin, I'm living the dream I had when I was in my 20s. That I got to hang out with my friends, have a laugh, and make a living doing it. And here I am. So thank you again from the bottom of my terrible, terrible, but very appreciative heart. Because this has been such a crazy long episode, I'm not going to give you the full spiel. I'm just going to thank our new patrons, and then we'll get moving. And here we go. Our latest patrons are Jennifer Garamendi, Ann Ford, Dan Garrity, Zachary Angel, Tyler Martin, Richard Alanis, Jay Raz, Tracy, and Jade Morse. Thank you so much, guys, for all the reasons I said before. And if you want to join the team, head on over to patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. That's patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. Also, real quick, I know times are hard right now. Things are so uncertain. Turducken has really put the bite on all of us. And if you can't support the show right now, or if you are currently supporting, but that needs to change in order for you to be able to make your own bills, please don't worry about it. I know some folks have reached out, and I really appreciate that you do that, but I understand. It is, we all got to do the best we can right now, and the show's not going anywhere. When you're able to come back, well, by God, we'll still be here. If you want to get in touch, shoot me an email at ghoststoryguys@gmail.com. I read everything that comes in. We're also on Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok as Ghost Story Guys, and on Instagram as The Ghost Story Guys. You can reach me and Paul through all those different methods, but if you do have a story to share, please do send it to the email. Again, that's ghoststoryguys@gmail.com. And of course, if you have a story and you don't feel like typing, you can always call the Ghost Line. That's right, 1-888-588-6920 is the number to call, or you can text at 925-553-4789. And I'm working on a way to share those voicemails and those texts with everybody. All right, like I said, it was a long show, and I have a lot of outtakes for you guys, a huge amount of outtakes, And patrons are going to be getting probably about, well, at least 10 and possibly 20 minutes of bonus material that just didn't fit into this. So I'm going to be quick here. If you want to pick up any merch, head on over to ghoststoryguys.com and you can follow the links to the relevant web store. If you'd like to leave a 5-star review anywhere you can rate podcasts, I'd certainly appreciate it. And a reminder that if you are emergency services personnel and you have a story to tell, I am looking for material for my new book, so shoot me a message at ghoststoryguys@gmail.com and we'll figure out a time we can have a chat, because I would very much appreciate it. That also goes for stories from the Los Angeles area. If you're from that area, you'd have a story that you're willing to lend to my project, again, shoot me an email and we'll have a chat. Our theme song, Radio, Into the Darkness We Go, is composed and performed by Peter of Podzontommusic. Find more from him by searching for Podzontommusic wherever you get your tunes. Our story's theme is The Future Belongs to Them Now by Hexxagram. They are also available everywhere you stream your music. And remember, that's Hexxagram with 2 X's, not 3. Finally, all other music and sound effects for this show are provided courtesy of Epidemic Sound. If you're looking for PodSafe music or sound effects for your next project, head on over to epidemicsound.com to check them out. And I guess that's going to do it. Thank you for sticking with us through this enormous episode. Man, I was not expecting the show to go this long. So thank you for sticking with us. Thank you for being here. And we'll be back in 2 weeks with another show. Until then, into the darkness we go. I actually believe they would turn into Lord of the Flies and you would win. You'd just be this like sun-baked lizard creature wearing other people's pelts as a cape and as like a jacket.
And it's a like kendo sword.
Yeah. Beat them all to death with his kendo sword. He's got the captain's skull at the end of it.
Well, the salty air would help the skins dry quicker.
See,
wow.
you thought of that. Too. Yeah, way too fast. Look at the time. I'm going to go wash my hair in the witness protection program. Like, this is what, 3.5 hours already? And I'm like, yeah, that's about right. There was one time there, it was getting past midnight. That's actually how we started doing the thing where Paul signs off at the beginning of the C segment and I just go. Because, like, no, if he stays on for this whole thing, he's going to be here for 100 years.
Yeah. You could hear me crying.
Yeah, or snoring lightly. And then afterwards, I said, I'm heading out and I'm going to Amarillo. And they put their hands on my shoulder and they said, Brennan, do not make any of the jokes that we made here tonight once you get out of Austin. Do you understand me? And I said, yeah, I think so. Why? What's up? And they said, no, just don't. Just don't. Don't ask any questions. Just don't. Yeah, I was just doing some push-ups. I did a whole bunch of them. It was tough. On the music show I did there, Paul, but I mentioned on there that one day I expect you to tell me that you killed the guy. Like, I figure that you're just going to work up to that.
This could be the day.
Could be. Kevin Eustace, of course. Fuck me. Jesus fucking Christ.
I know it's been a good show, but come on.
Oh.
I'll do so much, but
Yeah, how did you get that check?
Okay, Paul, you are up with number 5, whatever I've said number 5 is.
Yeah, the confusingly entitled number 5, room number 4.
Oh, wow. That's right. Riddle me this.
Some mad woman in London once asked me if I was Bonehead from Oasis, and I just thought, are you not wearing your glasses, love?
She just went with it and said, yeah, I am. What of it?
Point being, Bill Murray would periodically just wander through the kitchen because he could. And so it makes me think that at least some of those douchebaggy Bill Murray stories are in fact true. Oh, sorry,
and I think a lot of it.
Just want to jump in. I think that I'm just trying to find the page here. It should be pubs go through a lot of staff.
Oh.
It's my bad.
That's true as well, but they're both right.
Yeah, technically both correct. But sorry, guys, I'll be right back. My cat is making all kinds of noise. I just want to get her out of here so she doesn't... Yeah.
I'm just glad it was the cat.
Yeah.
I was like, what's wrong with his knees?
Oh, they're bad too, but for different reasons. One second.
Yeah, we always do the beginning better at the end than at the beginning.
Oh yeah, warmed up then, haven't you?
Yeah. We should just talk shit for an hour and then just do the stories. I think. Looks like we got one of those comedians with us.
That's right.
I once went to a U2 gig party that U2 didn't attend. My mate's band supported them at Wembley Stadium in '97, which is one of the most exciting days of my life because I was guest listed for a U2 gig at Wembley Stadium.
Wow.
Whoa.
So who's your mate's band? Because they must be big if they're supporting U2.
They were the Long Pigs.
Oh yeah, I've heard of the Long Pigs.
Yeah, and my mate Richard Hawley was the lead guitarist, now a very successful solo artist. In fact, I was watching an episode of The Simpsons the other day and one of his songs was on it.
Oh, wow.
Which blew me away. But anyway, so we went to this gig and they were the main support and it was incredible, absolutely mind-blowing. And U2 are one of them bands. I mean, this was 97. And it was one of them gigs when they'd finish, you were thinking, well, they've not sang that, and they've not sang that, they've not, you know what I mean? It was one of those. And I think at that point, they were at the height of their powers. You know, it was just after Achtung Baby and Zooropa and Pop. It was the Pop tour, actually. So we all got, obviously, because we were guest listed, we all went to the after show gig. And we went, and it was one of those gigs where, you know, there's a queue of very slim, attractive women queuing for the toilet, and everybody came out with a cold. It was one of those parties, shall we say. And there was everybody else who was there. There was loads of like famous people wandering about, and indie is like, you know, a who's who of mid-90s British indie music. It was all just loitering about and stuff. And somebody said, "Oh, so when are you two in?" And somebody went, "Oh, no, they're having their own party somewhere else." they were having another party at the other side.
They're having the actual party.
And I was just blown away by the audacity of it, that you have a backstage party and don't even go.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is for the rest of you.
You peasants. There's the party and then there's the party.
Yeah, absolutely. Crazy night. We stopped in the Sherlock Holmes Hotel that night as well.
Oh, cool!
Wow.
I think I told you this story, Paul. I don't know if I've told you this story, Kev, but I'll tell it briefly. I understand, you know. But I was in LA a few years ago, and I was there for the AFI Film Festival, and at the time I bought a patron pass, you know, because I was a member of AFI. The patron pass got you into a few of the premiere parties. And it was I don't know, I mean, the drinks were free, so, you know, hey, score. And it's all really douchebaggy LA types mostly, but and I although I did get to see a very pregnant Natalie Portman almost get elbow dropped by a drunk LA County civil servant, which I'll tell that story another time. But the party story is I was at the party for La La Land, and that was a big fucking party. I went out back because it was a lot. It was just a lot. And of course, you know, LA parties, in my very limited experience, it's people will like look straight into your face to see whether or not you're of any use to them. And if not, they keep on going. So I thought, I'm done. I'm going to go out back, have a drink. There was a little patio area. So I go out back, I'm sitting down. And I end up in a conversation with this elderly British gentleman in this very nice suit with long white hair. And we started because he lit up a joint and he said, "Oh, you know, do you mind?" And I said, "Oh, no, go for it, man." And we got talking about weed, and he starts telling me about hanging out with Leonard Cohen, because I mentioned I was from Canada. He goes, "Oh, you just lost Leonard." And I said, "Oh, yeah, it was my buddy Leonard. It was real. It was the shits."
Oh, Lenny.
Yeah, right. And he starts talking about how he used to make suits for Cohen back when he worked at Armani. And Cohen would come in for fittings, and he would sing to him while he was measuring him. And the conversation just went all over the place. And eventually, because this happens to me, because I have what me and my mother call bartender face, people just end up telling you shit. So he's telling me about his son and his son's struggle with addiction. And he was telling me about how, you know, I was talking to Sly, and of course, you know what Sly went through. And, you know, like Stallone's son died of an overdose after he cut him off. Yeah. And Sly told me, he's like, I cut him off, and I don't know if it was the right thing, but, you know, he did the best he could, and I don't know if I could do that to my son. He's really unloading all this heavy shit on me. So I thought, yeah, okay, this is interesting. It's kind of a connection here of some kind. And then mid conversation, this dude sticks his head out from the door and says, "George, what are you doing out here, man?" And the old British guy goes, What you mean? Everyone's got the suite upstairs, man. That's where the real party is. You coming? And the connection was over. The phone was hung up. George grabs my hand, shakes it, says, be good to yourself. And he fucked off to where there was cocaine and ladies.
Yeah.
He was done. So that's where Emma Stone went, to the party above the party.
Yeah. I like the sound of George. He sounds like a cat.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He was quite the guy. I looked up his name. I managed to figure out who he is. Anyways, yeah, no, he was a lot of fun, but that was a real frank, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a very frank intro to how relationships work in that town. Like we're very close. There's a better opportunity. Fuck you.
Yeah, and you are.
Yeah, exactly.
What was your name again?